This is Anby, and in a weird way, I kind of think of her like ZZZ's Ryu. She's simple, but consistent, with hidden depths that make her insanely versatile once you master her playstyle. In fact, Anby is so good, I wish there were two of her for both of my teams, because not only is she one of the most free-to-play friendly units as the only non-S-rank stunner we have for the immediate future, she's also one of the most accessible, most flexible enablers of combo tech in the entire game. Hi, hello, welcome, call me Casual, and I'm really excited to present you with an in-depth look at my favorite lovable idiot, Anby. Anby is brilliant. In fact, I have no idea if this is a hot take or not, but I think she may be one of, if not the best free-to-play units in the entire game. I mean, she and Nicole kind of share a crown in my mind, and on top of that, if you asked me to point to any individual character, I'd recommend learning to play if you wanted to get better at Zenless as a whole, if you wanted to get really comfortable with the nuances of the game and its various systems, she would be at the top of my list. And with that in mind, I've got some tech I want to show you towards the end that works for just about every character, but Anby in particular gets a lot of value out of. You see, she's quietly a lot of fun. Her basic combos are relatively straightforward, but feature branching paths, allowing you to mix things up to match the situation at hand. She can be used across a huge variety of teams to bolster their output, and she's one of the few characters who can launch as well as comfortably juggle enemies completely unassisted. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's video and start discussing her core mechanics as well as combos and tech, let's talk about when you would want Anby on your team and why I think she's one of the best characters in the game. Potentially one of the best units you could invest in right now if you're on the fence about who to build next, because that is more important now than ever for a lot of us. You see, we're now a couple of weeks into the launch of Zenless Zone Zero, and even if you've been taking your time, a lot of players are probably reaching the part of the game where you're starting to look for a second team to invest in if you haven't been already. For those who aren't familiar, especially because ZZZ has attracted a lot of players who haven't played a ton of gacha games, if any at all, eventually as you reach the mid-game, and certainly once you reach the end game, the average player is going to want at least 2 full teams of 3 characters each. But considering leveling resources are limited by the time gating and monetization, who you choose to invest in can be beyond important unless you're ready to light your wallet on fire, essentially. I mean, gacha games are kind of weird in the sense that unlike most other games, you can actually semi-brick your account if you aren't careful and try to invest resources in leveling too many characters all at once. You can actually wind up bottlenecking yourself very easily, so whoever you decide to invest in early can be key. Not to mention, because of the, there are a lot of players out there who won't have anywhere close to a full roster yet, even of A-rank units. Maybe because the Gamba gods haven't smiled upon them, or even simply because they're just saving up their pull currency for future characters like Jane or Miyabi. And so part of the point of this video is to pitch you on Anby, a character that everyone receives for free at the start of the game, who is so versatile out of the box, no cinemas needed, that I think a lot of people, especially free-to-play players, are going to want to consider building her as a core component of one of their teams. That being said, a quick disclaimer. Now that I've spent quite a bit of time with the game, I think ZZZ's launch roster is pretty respectably balanced, all things considered. Obviously, there are clear standouts like Ellen or Zhu, but my point is, I think there isn't a single character on the roster who's a genuine dud here. Like, there's not an Amber or an Arlen, right? So, and I'm always going to advocate for finding your own personal fun over playing to the meta, so really and truly know that you can play whoever you like, and as long as you're leaning into your favorite character's strengths, you're going to be more than fine. And of course, my personal love for Anby is obviously a bit biased by my love for her combo potential, but even setting that aside, even if I didn't really care about combos, I would still be building Anby. Allow me to explain. This will steadily become less of a concern as the game matures and more characters are added to the roster, but for now, Anby is our only dedicated A-rank stunning unit. Ben certainly has potential in that area with the right partners on his team, but he's a little bit of a different circumstance. We'll be talking about him and the unique elements of his kit very soon. But anyway, for now, she's our only real accessible stunner, which is a bigger deal than some might realize. You don't entirely need to depend on stunning enemies in ZZZ. For example, a solid anomaly team doesn't even really need a dedicated stunner, but especially as you get further into the game and start fighting enemies like the Ballet twins and pushing further into Shield defense, I think you'll start to find that stunning enemies, bosses in particular, might be one of your biggest sources of damage. After all, a lot of characters get most of their damage from the end of their attack strings, like Ellen's round trip, which we discussed last week, and having to constantly dodge or parry in the middle of a combo can actually really hurt your damage output, so the ability to quickly immobilize an enemy and get a ton of free bonus damage on top is huge. It's why I wish I had two of her. I mean, just look at how fast this boss's health bar just vanishes as soon as I manage to stun it and go to work, and I haven't even fully built my Zhu, nor do I even really know how to play her yet. With team-focused games like this, a lot of people tend to build their teams around certain archetypes, and Anby is kind of like a perfect fit in almost all of them. A traditional team comp at the moment likely contains a main DPS, a stunning unit, and a support, which Anby is obviously a perfect fit for, but of course, you could also go off the beaten path and run dual DPS plus a stunner, and Anby will still feel right at home. Heck, if you like anomaly builds and happen to have Grace, Anby is one of her best teammates. I mean, you pair them together, toss in an Anton maybe, and you'll be stacking so much shock anomaly, enemies will just kind of disintegrate. Obviously, Lycon and Koleda can stun enemies much quicker than Anby, and I expect the same is going to be true of Qingyi, but of course, those are all S ranks, and who knows how long it's going to be until we see another A rank stunning character. So if you're on the fence debating who to invest into, Anby is just a top tier option in my mind, and that'll likely become even clearer soon because it's time to talk about what she brings to the table with her kit. Anby is a really interesting character for a number of reasons. I mentioned how flexible she is. That's partially because she loves dodging. As I've mentioned before, one of the cool things about ZZZ and each character is they all seem to have their own specialties among the game's core mechanics, and because Anby in particular gets so much value out of her dodges, you kind of don't have to be nearly as worried about finishing her combos like you do with certain other characters like Ellen, when a good series of dodge counters will be totally fine. Obviously, those dodge counters aren't quote-unquote optimal. We'll talk about what is in a moment, but they do build respectable shock, and if you're landing them consistently, they are a great way to keep your Daze application up even while enemies are trying their hardest to stop you. Her synergy ability also actually gives her an energy bump every time you land one of those, which you'll want to aim for often to battery her EX special, one of my favorite specials in the game actually, for how loaded up with iframes it is, how consistently it'll stagger enemies, and how it almost always leads to a stun when used effectively, because if you take a look at her core passive, you'll notice she even gets a pretty sizable boost to the amount of daze she can inflict every time she uses said special. But you may also notice, aside from boosting her special, there's also a move called Thunderbolt that gets a sizable dazed boost as well, which is actually the basis for one of the really cool unique things about Anby's normals and attack strings. You see, if you briefly pause for a second after her first 3 attacks, before pressing the attack button again, she'll execute a ground slam called Thunderbolt instead of the rest of her normal attack string, which alongside her EX special is one of her best attacks for building daze. Normally, if you're just spamming attack, you'll get this series of electric slashes, but Anby's Thunderbolt is so good that you'll want to aim for that instead more often than not for the extra daze. And you'll want to get very comfortable with that brief pause, with waiting for that flash after her 3rd attack, because this also enables her to directly combo into her special, whereas otherwise it'll come out slower, leaving space for the enemy to counter. It's what you've seen me doing throughout all of the combo clips, the first 3 attacks immediately followed by a special to launch the enemy. Notably, you can also factor her dodge into this, which is key, because especially if you're looking to juggle enemies, you'll likely find yourself constantly canceling out of her attacks with dodges. Like I showed in that combo in the beginning, a couple of dash cancels can be a great way to build a bit of extra energy for Anby before triggering her EX special. You see, the first attack in her basic string is this side slash, right? But if you dodge first, you'll get this circular spinning move instead, which also substitutes as the first attack in her combo string. So you can directly follow it up with 2 more attacks like usual and then go into either her Thunderbolt or her special. And that'll be one of the decisions you're going to be making constantly in any fight. Are you going for a Thunderbolt or a special attack? Again, the EX special makes her invulnerable, so if you see an attack coming and know you won't have time for a Thunderbolt, you can perform an EX special instead and then go for a Thunderbolt afterwards by simply pressing the attack button again, because that special attack also functions as a delay as long as you did the first 3 attacks first. Or if you're fighting a smaller enemy and want to end on a launcher, you can lead with Thunderbolt and then go for a special attack immediately afterwards to start juggling. Her standard special is incredible for setting up combos, so don't sleep on it just because it's obviously not as good as her EX, right? Just keep in mind though, her standard special is absolutely more about utility than anything. It doesn't do nearly as much damage, or build as much daze, or stack as much shock as her Thunderbolt or EX, so if you're faced with a choice, I'd say go with Thunderbolt over the standard special every time. That standard special does apply decent electro anomaly though, just be careful you don't cancel out of it too early with a dash or something, or it won't be fully applied. And when it comes to the EX special, keep in mind, even if you're not interested in juggling, it's a great move to use anytime you need to give yourself a little bit of breathing room. Enough time where most enemies will either be airborne or briefly staggered if they aren't outright stunned, giving you plenty of space to sneak in one of Nicole's black holes, for example, or any other skill with a bit of a wind-up to it. And even though Anby can't combo out of her EX special by herself, keep in mind, swapping in another character is a great way to keep an airborne enemy immobilized. Even after triggering a chain attack, you can still land a combo as long as the character you're using has a chain attack like Neko's, for example, that will hold an enemy in place long enough for Anby to swap back in and finish her plate. So TLDR, here's Anby's general game plan. As a stunning unit, you'll want her on field fairly frequently in higher end content to proc stun faster. Thankfully, Anby doesn't have any resources of her own to manage outside of her special meter, so she works really well in teams that are rapidly swapping between characters. I often find myself opening fights by battering my DPS a little bit, then swapping into Anby at the first sign of a juicy parry to start stacking that stun meter. Aim to land as many Thunderbolts and EX specials as possible to build daze, while always keeping an eye out for opportunities to dodge counter and battery her energy reserves. Her parry assists are great, but not really what you're aiming for at all times, and she's a character that really benefits actually from learning the timing for triggering a dodge counter while simultaneously swapping to another character to also land the parry, or triggering her EX special for the invulnerability frames, then immediately swapping into another character to parry while her attack finishes in the background. You might be surprised by how often this combination can take a daze meter from half empty to a full stun in a second. I'm thinking long term of using iframes in this way is gonna be a key part of high level gameplay. Generally speaking, you might find yourself juggling smaller enemies to keep them immobilized while you finish your combos, and focusing on using her generous iframes to dodge attacks from elites and bosses without having to stop your combo. This in particular is going to be key for keeping her daze application up because yeah, the dodge counter is fine, of course, but it does not build nearly as much daze as an EX special. So when playing as Anby, just be careful you don't get tunnel vision and focus too much on finishing her combo strings. Quite often, especially if you've already stacked some days with well-timed counters, you can go straight into a raw EX special to trigger the stun without having to worry too much about the rest of your sequence. So with all that being said, now that you know how Anby's kit works at its core, let's get into her basic bread and butter combos. Anby's target combo, what I'm pretty sure is her best option for building up daze as well as dealing some damage, is 3 basic attacks, pausing for Thunderbolt, then finishing with an EX special. Or inverting that, and going for the EX special first, followed by the Thunderbolt. I'm reasonably confident the end result is the same regardless of which route you choose, but like I said earlier, you kinda want to decide when to use your EX special based on whatever the enemy is doing, and look to take advantage of Anby's invulnerability. From the moment the EX skill starts to shortly after her feet touch the ground again, she's fully invincible, which is plenty of time to completely sidestep a lot of enemies' attack strings with the appropriate timing. Since her dash attack also counts as the first part of her string, you can of course lead with that and then finish the rest of the combo normally, which can be a great way to give yourself a buffer if you're unsure if an attack is about to hit you or not without having to interrupt your flow too much. Now, especially with smaller enemies, you also want to consider what condition you want them to be in by the time you're done with your combo. End on a special if you want them airborne or to start juggling them, and go with a Thunderbolt if you want to knock them down briefly. Either finisher can give you a bit of time to set up your next attack, whether that's another Anby combo or swapping to your next character. Now, for those of you into juggling, which I can't recommend enough because not only is it a ton of fun, but the free crowd control is kinda nice and will likely only get more valuable as the game matures, especially since chain attacks will soon be manual instead of automatic with patch 1.1, which, thank God, what a W for the dev team and the community. Anyway, you have a couple of options when it comes to juggling. What's likely the more optimal approach for building stun and dealing damage is 3 basic attacks into Thunderbolt followed by a standard special attack immediately afterwards to launch the enemy. Then I like to do a neutral dodge into 3 more basic attacks ending on another Thunderbolt. This will stun most weaker enemies basically without fail. If the first Thunderbolt doesn't do it, the second one almost certainly will, and if for whatever reason that doesn't, another special absolutely will. However, if you don't want to stun the enemy yet for whatever reason, I like to go for 3 basics directly into the launcher, then loop dash attacks until I either have the energy I wanted so I can trigger her EX special, or until I'm ready to swap into another character like Nicole to keep the combo going. Now, you might have noticed a little stutter there. That's what happens every time you max out the stun bar without triggering a stun. It can throw your combo timing off if you aren't careful. So if I notice I'm getting close to stun, I try to make sure it happens in the middle of looping basic attacks, since the timing isn't very tight on that. Just be careful not to mash too much and you'll have no problem maintaining the juggle even through the stutter. Now, I do also want to mention a very small piece of tech. It won't hurt to learn. It'll likely be slightly less relevant after chain attacks are manual, but if you're about to hit an enemy with an attack that triggers stun, a combo ender like Anby's EX special for example, but you don't want stun to start right away, you can swap right before the attack fully connects and the stun won't trigger. You can just happily continue your combo. Here, for example, I wanted some more flash freeze stacks for my Ellen, so even though Anby's EX special was enough to trigger stun on its own, I was able to do one of the loops I showed you in the last video and battery Ellen that way. Then I went straight into Sokaku afterwards, and just like that, my Ellen's flash freeze is full without missing a single beat. And just like I said in the Ellen video, don't get too attached to any of this as ironclad combo rotations. You want to look at these more as flexible routes instead. Anby is pretty simple, but the sheer variety of options she has on deck is what will keep you constantly moving, looking to capitalize on whatever openings you can find. Now, the last one of her most basic bread and butter combos I wanted to mention is one I almost forgot about. A shout out to Nier and Alter. They emailed me this document they've been doing some excellent work on, compiling a bunch of info on the Cunning Hares and their combos. I checked it as a reference after I was done with the script to make sure I wasn't missing anything, and I'm glad I did, because it turns out I was. Because apparently my free-to-play brain rot is so bad, I kinda just forget Mindscapes even exist half the time. But if you happen to have Anby's first Mindscape, which will be very attainable for a lot of players, especially as time goes on, but anyway, if and when you acquire that, you'll also want to weave in her normal attack string occasionally. That's just the 4 normal basic attacks without pausing for Thunderbolt, because that string will now boost her energy regeneration once you have her M1, allowing her to use her EX special more often. You can always just go with the standard 4 basic attacks to trigger the buff as quickly as possible, or you can do the Thunderbolt launcher string, and instead of ending on another Thunderbolt, you can end on the 4 basic attacks instead, which will send smaller enemies flying across the room, giving you some nice distance plus some knockdown. Don't sleep on this as an option in combos as well, because even though 2 Electro Slashes come out, they only require a single input, so as soon as the animation starts, you can safely swap off of Anby and she'll finish the slashes in the background, while holding the enemy in place so you have time to get your next character on the field to pick up the combo. And speaking of combos, now that all the basics are out of the way, let's put all this together and get fancy with it. Now, before I start walking you through the showcase combo from the beginning, teaching you how to do it yourself, a couple of quick notes about combo theory in ZZZ. You see, in my mind, putting together combos like the one I'm about to show you largely comes down to figuring out 3 things. How am I getting the enemy in the air, which attacks will keep an enemy in the air, and which attacks stay on screen long enough to swap characters and cover other attacks that don't. In this case, I decided to run a traditional Cunning Hares team, not only because I'm a big fan, I love all 4 of them, but everyone has access to these characters, meaning everyone can try out the combo if you feel like it. But this type of stuff is possible with a variety of combinations of characters. So as I walk you through this, take note of which attacks are doing which of those 3 things I mentioned, and if you want to craft your own combos like this, know that figuring out those 3 things for your team and their kit is a great place to start. So let's get started. Just like last time, I'm going to give you a really quick overview of the combo, then we'll dive deeper, and I'll give you a few tips to hopefully make executing it yourself easier. As is pretty standard with these kinds of combos, I started with the basic Anby string into a launcher. Then as soon as the launcher connected, I bring in Nicole to use 2 forward dash attacks to keep the enemy in the air. As soon as that second dash attack starts, you want to bring in Billy and trigger his dash attack immediately, which does not juggle, notably, which is why Nicole's second dash attack is important to sustain the juggle itself, followed by one of Billy's neutral attacks to pick up the enemy after her attacks finish, which does juggle, keeping the enemy afloat long enough for me to bring Anby back in. That's kind of the core of the loop. So that gets repeated until I notice I had almost enough special energy on Anby to trigger her EX. So now she stays on field and I continue juggling the enemy using dash cancels to keep the combo going until after her meter is full, which leads to one more cycle just to get to that third basic attack. I see the flash and then immediately go into EX special. To time this properly, before Anby's feet leave the ground, you should be calling Nicole in and immediately pressing her EX skill, followed by a 360 motion for the alternate version. If your timing is on point, the black hole will hit the enemy on the way up, helping sustain the juggle long enough to bring Billy in safely. I use 2 neutral dodge attacks with Billy to push the enemy towards the black hole, followed by his ult, which notably only juggles like this if the enemy is high enough above Billy when he starts, making the timing kinda tight, making those neutral basic attacks very important. As soon as the ult ends, you need to attack with Billy at least once so your Anby has enough time to safely slip in, pick the enemy up, and end the combo however you please. Make sense? Let's break it down a bit further. I think the Anby launcher individually is fairly self-explanatory at this point, but I often like to start combos with 2 launchers just to ensure I've got enough height. One to get the enemy in the air initially, and then a second one when I'm ready to swap character. Now, quick note about Nicole once you're swapping her in. This attack, the spinning briefcase, is cracked. It juggles so well, and this is just a great way to sneak in a couple of attacks on Nicole in the middle of a combo, proccing her passive that shreds enemy defenses, assuming you have her enhanced bullets, which you almost always will. That being said, you'll want to be careful to avoid mashing while doing this for a couple of reasons. First of all, the 2 attacks are a single input, a forward dash basic attack, and you want to make sure both of the attacks come out before inputting another forward dash in a basic attack. If you input the second dash too early before the attacks finish, you can wind up canceling out, which will lead to dropping the combo. You also want to avoid pressing and holding dash with Nicole, because if she starts running, she'll enter her auto reload state for her briefcase, and as soon as you trigger that, you're more or less locked into the animation until it's done. You can combo after that, but the timing is so insanely tight, I don't know if you want to try for that while learning. If you're styling though, it can be a lot of fun. And once you get comfortable with the standard Nicole loop, you can get even fancier by canceling into a neutral dash attack in between the 2 forward dash attacks. The timing is even tighter on that though, so I suggest learning the basic version first before trying to spice things up. Now back to the combo. It's worth noting that you can pick the enemy up with Nicole's attacks even sooner than this, but ideally you want to wait a sec until you see the enemy kind of above her head around here, and that's when you want to start juggling them. This is around the ideal height to allow plenty of space for the next part, which will be really tricky for a lot of people because you kind of have to do all of this back to back in one smooth motion, otherwise the combo drops. If you notice you're having trouble with this, the first place I would check is the height of the enemy, because if the enemy drops too low, it just makes everything way harder. Now, as soon as Nicole finishes the first forward dash attack sequence and begins to start the animation for the second, Billy needs to be coming on field and dashing immediately. I mentioned his spinning gun attack doesn't juggle. Yeah, it kind of just peppers the enemy with bullets, so it's just not good enough on its own. That's why you need to ensure Nicole's second dash attack is out to hold the enemy in place, giving Billy enough time to finish his dash attack and sneak in at least one basic immediately afterwards to pop the enemy back up. If you're really fast with it though, you can kind of just send Billy out like a Beyblade, and you won't even need the basic attack because you'll have swapped in the Anby so quickly afterwards, she's the one picking up the Nicole juggle. But from there, back to the combo, it's just another Anby string into launcher and repeat. Now, getting the Anby's dash cancels, it kind of doesn't necessarily matter where in the string you cancel as long as you're doing it quickly and attacking immediately after the dash. You can do a forward dash, but I kind of just prefer neutral dashes for the sake of keeping my inputs clean, and more often than not, I tend to cancel my dashes after the second attack in the string, just to avoid accidentally triggering a Thunderbolt. Now, the Anby EX into Nicole EX special is a bit tricky as well. Again, before Anby's feet leave the ground, Nicole needs to be coming in, pressing her EX skill immediately, and then basically as soon as you see her animation start for firing the black hole standing, you want to roll your left stick in a 360-degree full circle to trigger the alternate version of her attack. It's worth noting, this is a great sequence, the Anby EX special into Nicole EX special, even if you're not focused on combos or juggling, simply because it can sometimes be hard to know where to smoothly sneak in a Nicole black hole outside of her chain attack, right? But this sequence is almost entirely safe. In between the two specials, there's only a few moments here where you won't have full invulnerability, and even though it won't juggle on its own, any enemy caught by this will be dragged into the black hole, so making it a great way to group some enemies before bringing your next character in. Which, in this circumstance, you want to start doing as soon as you confirm Nicole is starting to sit down, which is another moment where you'll want to be really careful with your inputs. If you fat finger a dash attack or something with Billy, really any movement that separates him from Nicole, and you'll likely wind up out of position, and any attack will push the enemy away from the black hole instead of into it. So, as soon as Billy comes in, before you start attacking, you want to ensure your position kinda behind, or at least directly next to Nicole. This is the ideal angle to juggle the enemy towards the black hole, and the most consistent way I've been able to manage this is by going into a neutral dash as soon as Billy runs in, because by default, he kind of starts running away from the character, placing his back to them, meaning a neutral dash places him again right next to them. From there, it's one basic attack canceling out of that neutral dash, immediately canceled into another neutral dash and one more basic attack. As soon as the second gunshot connects, immediately pop his ult, which again only juggles this effectively if the enemy is far above Billy when you trigger it, which is part of making sure the black hole hits the enemy on the way up just to help maintain that height. Now, as soon as the ult ends, you just need to be ready to hit the enemy with at least one Billy basic attack, which will give Anby enough time to run in and wrap up however you like. This is a brilliant combo to practice because as you get comfortable executing all of this, you'll steadily be able to use small parts of it throughout the game whenever you notice an opportunity. And like I said, these are combo routes, not ironclad rotations. You're gonna want to adjust them to fit the situation at hand. Like, sure, it's more optimal if I try to finish every Anby string, but in practical scenarios, I often find shortening it to be very helpful. Whether that's because I want to trigger stun with another character, or I want to start their attack string earlier, like in that Zhu clip I showed you in the beginning. Get to know your characters and their kits, and you'll find little opportunities for combos everywhere. Obviously, they don't apply to every enemy in every scenario, but once you learn how to do all this, you might be surprised how often you're putting aspects of it into action. And I'm not gonna lie, ZZZ is just so much more fun as a tag fighter once you start smoothly rotating through your entire team, constantly leveraging each character's strengths. Obviously, ZZZ is not as complex as Tekken or DMC, but once you start poking around under the hood, there's absolutely a ton to fall in love with here, and considering this is only 1.0 still, which is always the most simplistic version of any gacha game like this, considering all of this is already possible now, with free units no less, imagine what'll be possible a year from now. So hey, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth look at Anby, the queen of combos, and I cannot recommend enough that you give that showcase combo a try yourself. It might take a bit of practice, but if I can do it, I know you can too. More combo videos are coming your way very soon. Since I lucked into pulling Zhu Yan, you're almost certainly getting a video about her next, because she is insane. Like, Billy is dope, right? 100%. But Billy and Zhu Yan are like Rock Lee with and without the leg weights. It's like night and day. And on topic, I'm kind of thinking the Anby Nicole team is probably one of her best at the moment, considering Nicole enables both Anby and Zhu to trigger their passives, and the Nicole chain attack into Zhu for a damage cycle is just a ridiculous combination. Plus, Zhu benefits massively from stunning enemies, which Anby is obviously great at, and the two of them together have a ridiculous amount of combo potential. So, before we wrap up, just want to say thanks again. I was blown away last week talking about how the channel was creeping up on like 700 subscribers, and now we're at well over 1,000 and growing every day. So yeah, just thank you all so much for all the love and support and all the kind words. I'm absolutely going to keep trying to step my game up a little bit every single video, so if you like what you see, consider joining the crew. Forget about the min-maxing and the spreadsheets and embrace being a filthy casual. At least in my opinion, it's not the only way, but it is one of the best ones to find the personal fun in games like Zenless.